All right. Hi, everyone out there in the unique Genius in 33 world and strong communities. I am coming to you live from Lima, Peru. Again, my name is Jo Self. You can see that it says Sherry Strong on the screen, but that's because I log in with her information. So getting very excited about talking to you today about the talent theme of context. I really kind of like this one. I don't have it very high myself, but I have some very good friends that have it. And I've also met some really interesting people that have context very recently in my circle. And one of those fabulous people is Jo, who is with us today. So you've got two Joes on the call, which should be, a lot of fun because people who are named Jo are fantastic. So Jo, do me a favor, please. Will you tell the people a little bit about who you are, where you are, what you do, and of course, share those top 5 talents with us that you have?
Sure. I am coming to you from Kansas City, Missouri. I live in Kansas City. I am an attorney by profession and training. I work for the federal government. I work for a financial regulator and sort of in a more of a prosecutorial role. I am a parent. I have 2 children, a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I'm married. And my strengths are, number 1 is context, number 2 is restorative, 3 is either empathy or harmony, I can't remember, 4 is individualistic, and 5 is the flip of empathy or harmony.
Perfect. So we know you've got empathy and harmony in there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. And so just for those people out here who are still getting familiar with the talent themes, we want to let you know that according to Gallup, people exceptionally talented in the context theme enjoy thinking about the past. They understand the present by researching its history. So with that being said, Jo, what do you love about your context talent?
Well, love or not love, it's how I make sense of the world. I love history. And so now that I know sort of how it all fits together, it's just sort of how I make sense of the world and what's going on around me and the people around me. My son has context. I'm pretty sure he's only 10, but the way I would describe it is he's constantly building a chronology in his head. And so he will, it's evolved as time has gone on, but he will ask whenever something happens, he will ask, okay, did that happen before or after the Civil War or before or after the first Star Wars?
Right.
So I, when I first noticed him doing that was before I had any awareness of strengths or that any of these things. I was like, oh, he's building his internal file cabinet. So that's sort of how I would describe it is, it makes sense to me. And again, I have such a passion and love for history that it's, I guess for me, it's how I make sense of things, but it's also a fun way to view things.
Yeah. And I love that you're talking about the fact that he builds that timeline in his head, right? Like he's already building this succession of events. That's fantastic. I love talent spotting with our children. I think it's so much fun. And I love that you're seeing, a piece of you in him, right? Like that, some of that same love.
And we've added some new events like the moon landing, President Kennedy's assassination, when the Beatles were formed. And so we have more plots in our timeline now for him.
Cool. Well, that's a lot of fun. Well, as we know, our talents can sometimes not always show up in the best way possible. So if we look at the flip side of what you love about it, where do you see context occasionally maybe getting in your way or not being so great?
I feel like I need a lot of information to sort of build that timeline or to put that, mental map together. I know that that's exhausting to some other people. For example, my husband, like when he's telling me about something that happened at work, I'll have to say like, no, you've got to start like what happened, then what happened, then what happened, then what happened. And he's like, oh, let me tell you. We have to go through all of this detail, but it's really, I need a lot of it. Once I've got it, I've got it. Like once I've got that timeline or that chronology in my head, I can do anything with it, but I need a lot of information and I need it in a particular order. Where if I don't have that, like sometimes at work, if I am not included in meetings or I feel like I'm just like grasping at straws in the dark, and that's very frustrating for me. And I think having to require all the information can be frustrating to others.
Sure. Sure.
So,
I wouldn't see that happening.
I wouldn't call myself like, once I have a command of the facts, I have a command of the facts, but it takes a while and I need a lot of information to put it together. So.
Sure. Well, and I would imagine that serves you pretty well in what you do. I mean,
yes,
you kind of have to have all the facts and understand sort of the, and then what, and then what, and then what, right? In order to present the best case you possibly could, I would think.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
Sure. I can see where that would be frustrating for someone who doesn't have that natural proclivity to want to share all that information and just, moves forward.
Yeah. Let's just cut to the chase.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. So how have you seen context develop for you? Like even before you knew this was a talent, when you were a young girl or a student, like how do you see this having developed for you?
So I would say probably my earliest memories of it were I loved all the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. I probably read the entire series, each book like 5 times. And then I turned that into it. We would play Olden Days. And I truly wanted to transport myself to the past and live in a covered wagon and all of that stuff. And frankly, I guess now that I'm an adult and now that I've discovered this, like that wasn't how all children played. Like some children are playing in the future. And then I remember I think my dad has context as well. And so I probably starting in 3rd or 4th grade, I similarly developed an obsession with the Civil War. And that was really, we would talk about it all the time. And again, if I could have been transported back to that time, I would have done it in a heartbeat just to, I wouldn't call it preoccupation, but just kind of, that's where my imagination wandered, was actually in the past.
To the past.
So, yeah.
Great.
And just loved, I wasn't a history major, but just always excelled and loved history classes and could not understand how anyone would find them boring.
Well, it's funny because I don't have context high, but I was a history major.
Okay.
But it was funny, but it was mostly because one teacher taught me that history could be interesting. And for me, it was one of those areas of study that taught you a lot of skills without necessarily, I didn't have to be a history professor. And I was going to actually ask you if you did history, because with law, history is often a pre-law path that gets people into going into law school. So I was just kind of curious if you saw how your context fed into your choice for law as a career.
Well, it probably should have. That probably would have been maybe a better. So I started college as a journalism major.
Okay.
It just was not. It did not feed. It was not interesting to me. Probably not philosophical enough. But then when I decided to change majors, I just quickly changed to something. Well, I tried to talk my parents into letting me become an art history major. They could not see the practicality of that. So I just chose a degree that I could finish in 2 years. And I knew I was going to law school. So to me, law was the most practical way to use sort of that history, political science.
Sure.
My interest in those, it was practical way to use that. And it does, they do tie in. There are other strengths that could tie into it, but yeah, kind of wanting to wade into dense material and understand why laws are the way they are, or the purpose is something that's necessary as an attorney.
Well, and I think it's funny because you talked about your 2 other interests. So you started in journalism, which context actually fits really well into journalism, depending on what you're doing with it, because interviewing, understanding backstory, understanding the root of an issue, getting all sides of a story, context would really help there. And I can see where art history, kind of an obvious sort of piece right there as well, right? So context seems like you can certainly find those threads, because we always talk about strengths isn't what you do, but how you do it. So you can see how context pointed you in a few different directions and has at some point, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So what would you want so you talked a little bit about this, and I want you to go in maybe a little bit deeper, or maybe there's even another way in your family that it shows up. So what would you want somebody who doesn't have context to know about this talent so that you could avoid sort of misunderstandings or miscommunications, or even that frustration of like,
let me see the big picture. It may not seem necessary to you. It may not seem relevant, or like, it may seem like a waste of time, but it's motivating for me to see the big picture. Number one, it really like sparks my imagination. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it. Like in a work setting, like having a lot of different information and the backstory, and it may seem inefficient to you, but it actually, like, you'll get a lot more out of me if you just give me the information I'm asking for, or that I want. I mean, you almost like can't bombard me with enough information. And I'm sorting it in my head. I'm going to put it into a useful framework, but like more information is better. And when I ask about stupid details, please just entertain me.
Just indulge you.
Yes. Yes. It's not, I mean, I am sorting. I am very able to sort what's relevant and not relevant, but I almost need all of it to be able to sort it in a way that makes sense to me.
Sure. I can appreciate where that would make sense. So that being said, when you look at your other talents, like, how do you see your talents playing together really well? How do you see them kind of feeding each other?
So I think context and restorative play very well together. And the way I would describe it is like, I will help you build a better mousetrap. Like I can tell you what we should avoid. Like if we need to solve a problem or improve like an area, like I can give you so much context about how to do that in a good way. So I call that like I'll help you build a much better mousetrap. And I will know the backstory, like, or if I don't, I will learn it and tell you like all the mishaps that what we want to avoid in solving a problem. I think it makes me a good problem diagnoser as well. With harmony, let's see, I have jotted down some notes. Well, with harmony, for me, harmony is all about moving forward in a pragmatic way. So I can help move us forward in a very pragmatic, efficient way where we won't repeat mistakes of the past. With individualistic, I think that is, I kind of take into account everyone's past, that like I see your past as what makes you an individual. I can incorporate that.
Right.
And then with empathy, I don't know. For me, empathy is probably the strength I like the least. It causes me the most problems, but I will actually feel your past pain. And the way I would describe that is my dad was pretty severely neglected as a child. And he has context too, and tells a lot of stories about and I mean, it is physically painful for me to imagine his childhood because of, the hunger and the neglect and,
right.
I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad, but like, I can really, get in there with him. So yeah.
Right.
I mean, almost to the point, like I have to turn it off. But anyway, that's how it kind of plays for me with context, empathy.
Sure. Well, and I can see, so you could almost say that, while where it definitely feeds one another, that there can also be that point of, a little bit of contention, or not that they don't play well together, but that they can create a little bit of friction. So that like discomfort that you feel and how deep you can go with it, and having to lower volumes and things like that. Do you see context working with your other talents in a way that they can kind of cause friction, or they fight each other a little bit?
Sure. The common theme there would just be like spending too much time in the past. So with restorative kind of analysis paralysis, when those two, I mean, I would say like get going together in a bad way. With both harmony and empathy, almost like not being able to move forward, like, you know, like, well, this mistake or this bad thing happened, and like not really truly being able to be like, okay, we're going to look forward, just being able to make a clean break, I guess. Probably the same with an individualistic. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of like, you know, if I've had like a, you know, if there's been a area of conflict or something, like truly being able to move forward without taking that past into the, and, you know,
Well, and I think that's something people don't often explore or recognize with context when they're just getting started with talents is context on a good day in a good way can learn from past mistakes, right? You've mentioned being able to say, okay, this was a mistake. This is what we learned. This is how we move on, you know, with your harmony, that practical way of, you know, moving forward and not repeating the mistakes of the past, right? But then there's the slightly darker side of that, which can be a little bit of a grudge holder.
Absolutely. Like, well, you did this one time.
You did this one time, and I'm never going to forget that you did this one time, right? So context can be that little bit of a grudge holder. So I would imagine that would be an interesting thing to have to manage, right? And to sort of pay attention to. Yeah, I think that's one we don't always explore so much. So within your roles, how do you feel like context shows up for you in a strong way at work? Like, how does it help you at work?
Well, I mean, that sort of is my job most of the time is, I am looking at the past and figuring out if something, you know, violated the law and how it did and what are the facts that went. So I'm constantly looking at the past and putting it together to see if something, if someone did something wrong. So it, you know, as you might imagine, I'm looking at emails and documents and talking to people about things in the past. So that is like kind of what I eat and live at work. So it works well. And then I'm trying to think. So I have management responsibilities at work, like managing. I'm trying to think of how it shows up like in an HR function. Probably in a good way. Like I usually try to, and this might be context and restorative together, like when we finish a case or finish a big project, being like, okay, let's go back and do a postmortem. What went well? Where did we make mistakes?
Right.
How can we do this better next time? So kind of trying to figure out lessons learned.
Sure.
So that's probably, I mean, it is a large part of what I do at work. So I guess in that way, I probably have found, and I think for probably for most attorneys, I mean, you are looking at, you know, most attorneys are dealing with conflicts that happened in the past. So you have to know all the facts around what happened and know very cold the particular ins and outs of a particular incident.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would imagine it's a talent that serves what you do very, very well. And you mentioned sort of about the HR thing. I would imagine it also, you know, especially since you have harmony and empathy in there, you know, and the individualization is too, that is it really kind of helps you understand the backstories of people that you're working with. And so when it comes to looking how people are going to work well together or what's going on, and if someone's having a bad day, you go, oh, well, I kind of get why they're having a bad day, or this is not going this way because of this, right? I mean, I would imagine it really serves that relationship side.
Yeah. And strangely enough, because I think I don't know, I've heard that it's a rarer talent, but you know, most of the people I work with have it. So maybe that just says something about lawyers or the type of lawyers I hang around with. So.
I think you see talents. I mean, we never say that like, if you have context, you're going to be a lawyer, right? But if you have context, lawyer's probably something that's going to serve you very well because you already have a natural love of creating those timelines, looking back, getting backstories, creating all the facts to build a case, and a lot of that, you know, if this, then that, if this, then that, in, you know, in a succession type of way. So I do think I think that's an interesting point you make, that in careers, we do tend to see trends, but it doesn't mean that's the only thing you could do.
Right. Right.
Right.
And yeah, for
Right.
sure.
Because as we talked about, I mean, you talked about journalism. Context would be a great thing for, certain types of journalists to have, to go back and fact check and make sure all of the things are pointing out and that the timeline works, and right, especially in investigative
Build the
journalism,
story.
right?
Yeah,
build the story.
absolutely.
So, great. So how do you see context showing up at home or with your friends?
Well, I mean, so kind of a big realization I've had lately is, I mean, I love to read like historical fiction. I love watching documentaries, shows about the past. And so what I've realized kind of since I've started working with you and looking at my strengths is that like, it's kind of a way I blow off steam. So it's like, again, like a creative or listening, like there was a podcast I listened to called Presidential, the Washington Post podcast, and they went through and did like a biography, or like each episode of the podcast was on, and I could not wait for that podcast to come out each week. I mean, it was just a way for me to kind of relax, or
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. So that I kind of think with other stuff, like I love a good before and after story. So just hearing, talking to people about how they came to be, who they are, and that sort of thing is probably, or probably in my personal life, how I use it, or how it comes up. I'm trying to think as a parent. I don't know, since my son has it,
do you have like a scrapbook or like a memory box, or do you look at old photos or anything with your kids?
I like looking at old photos, but I'm really, really bad at the scrapbooking photo thing. I'm not a very good photographer, so maybe that's why. Probably like around Christmas and, holidays, well, this is like building traditions, even though we're not photographing or photographing them, but like, this is what we always do on Christmas Eve, and this is why, and this is how we, very thoughtful traditions and thought through are very important to me. I'm very sentimental, so those sorts of things probably show up for me as a parent.
Yeah, and I kind of love that you use the word sentimental. So we do know you have some relationship pieces in there, but I do think even without high relationship supporting context, I do think there tends to be a bit of sentimentality to it because of those connections that we can put meaning into things, or things from our past that maybe other people wouldn't put meaning into. But there can be a sense of nostalgia or a sentimentalism, right, that creeps up with context in certain cases.
Yeah. I mean, the way I would describe it, like my husband has context very low. So, holiday traditions, why do we need those? I mean, let's just do whatever we feel like doing. Which I now can grasp. I can grasp why, that's appealing to some people. But to me, it's just like, well, that is the holiday, is all the traditions, and So I mean, that's probably some other stuff showing up too. But that's, I mean, again, it's like how I make sense of the world.
Of course, other talents feed into it, and like you have relationship ones. But I think even, I think of some other people I know that have context, and like their top 5 is all strategic thinking. Like they don't have relationship, not that we're just our top 5, right? But they don't have relationship like right there. And, and they still have a certain amount of sentimentality, or they have a memento box, or they have, like my best friend growing up, her daughter was born as a preemie. And I think every time I've ever been to her house, she gets out the box and shows me the little teeny tiny diaper and the little teeny tiny hat and the like little teeny tiny, feeding tube. And like, she shows this to me every time I come to visit her.
Yeah.
Right. Her daughter's 12 now.
Yeah.
Did I ever show you this? And they're like, show it to me again. Show it to me again. Right. Because I know it's important to her. Right. That piece of it is important to her. So I do think you see it there. All right. So famous people or fictional characters. Did you happen to come up with anyone that you think kind of represents context like you understand it?
Yeah, I did. So I've been indulging my context kind of since I've learned about strengths, and because it's, it gives me energy. So I have been one show I really love is The Crown. And so I'm going to say Queen Elizabeth, as she's portrayed in The Crown, which is someone who's very respectful of the past and history, but in a very, not just for the sake of like, I mean, to her it has meaning, and we do these things because of X, Y, and Z. I mean, and she's not always unwilling. I mean, she's willing to entertain. I don't know. I like her. Like, she's pragmatic, but she's very respectful of the past and the tradition, and you know, the history of what she is.
The way she's portrayed there, because she's someone who's willing to take steps forward, right, and move on
with a lot of very,
if there's a necessity to move on, but with a respect and a careful thought on how does that affect where we've come from, what are our traditions, and why are those traditions there, right? Like, she's not inflexible because she's tied to the past, but she's very respectful of making sure not to just throw it away either.
So and kind of, I see how it like, I mean, like,
back. We had just a little minor freeze.
The kind of the conflict, I mean, like, it's not, you know, tortured isn't the right way, but I mean, she has to think a lot about it. And so that, I mean, I think she exemplifies, good at exemplifying the strength. So.
Yeah, excellent. Well, perfect. Well, so now that you've recently learned about your strengths and you've been diving into them a little bit more and learning more, what's been the biggest impact for you? And what would you say to someone else out there who's only recently discovering their strengths or maybe hasn't done it yet? Why should they do it?
I think it's a great way to, I have a lot of things to say, but I think it's just really empowering, and it's a great way to think of people, yourself, and others in a very respectful way to interact with others. And so I love that about it. That's like just a respectful base that we can all start from. Especially, I think about that as like a manager of other people. But for me, I mean, it's been so enlightening. Like, I guess I just assumed everyone kind of was put together the way I was, or thought about things the way I did. I'm now seeing how wrong that is. But it's also been very, I don't know. I feel like I'm just, you know, beginning the journey, but, what's coming to mind is like permissive, like, okay, you know, like, all right, you know, if watching The Crown feeds that context and gives me energy and like stimulates my brain, great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But before I would have been like, oh, this is, you know, this is indulgent, or I should, this isn't, but now that I can see things like that as like, okay, this is the way that I'm like investing in myself, because it's giving me energy. I think all of this is about energy management and where you get your energy from, and anything that kind of feeds that creative energy. And, you know, I would have never been able to see it that way before. I mean, like, I know now that that's what it is. Like, when I watch things like The Crown, or like, it is like, it's very energizing to me and very sparks a lot of creativity. It gets my mind going. I would have never been able to articulate that, or even accept that or appreciate that. You know, like I said, my husband doesn't have anything like that. And he actually likes watching, like, we like watching The Crown together, but he has strategy. So he's seeing it like, you know, he's pulling something different out of it. And I can now see like how he blows off steam using through other strengths. And so before I've been like, why are you trying to learn Swahili? Well, you know, he has learner, and that's very, you know, that stimulates his brain. And so it's just helpful. I guess it's all about like, know thyself. I mean, to oneself be true. I mean, it's,
sure. Well, and I love that you kind of focused on that part of the energy piece, because I was tied into that when you started pulling your hobbies and interest into this and seeing it with your talents. Because I think that's another thing we don't look at, is that our hobbies and the things that we do to relax are actually often very tied into our talents. right? And
Mm-hmm.
so different talents will do different things to decompress, to find fun, to relax. You know, somebody might find a crossword puzzle really enjoying, someone else watches The Crown. I do like playing Candy Crush, but what I like about it, I can see as my strategic, because I like, you know, I have a certain amount of steps I need to accomplish something, like in a weird way that feeds my strategic with, and still lets my brain relax at the same time. I don't have to apply it to anything serious. So you kind of brought up the hobby and energy giving piece of strength that we don't always think about. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And we are just about out of time, and I know you have a meeting you need to run to. So Joe, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today and to share your beautiful expression of context with the rest of us out there in the world and in our Strong Communities organization. Thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. We will see you again next week to explore another fabulous talent. Certainly appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you all there. And remember, we're just wrapping up our 1-minute briefing on Alexa, which can also be found on podbean.com. We are on week 34 of our deep dive series, and we've been finishing it for later. So be sure to check it out at strongcommunities.podbean.com. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful week, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you.